When I opened my eyes in this world, I was sitting inside a swaying bridal sedan chair. Outside the curtain, drums and gongs thundered through the street. The wedding matron was calling out in her shrill, festive voice that the auspicious hour had arrived. Yet my wrist was still marked with a ring of dark bruises, and in my palm I was clutching a crumpled marriage document. I lowered my eyes and read the words written on it. Shen Fuguang, the second legitimate daughter of the Shen family, was to marry into the Jing'an Marquis estate and become the wife of the heir, Xie Linyuan. But very quickly, from the chaotic memories left behind by the original owner of this body, I understood the truth. This marriage had never been meant for her. The bride was supposed to be Shen Mingzhu, the eldest daughter of the Shen family. The Jing'an Marquis estate had once been powerful and glorious. The old marquis had died in battle at the border. The dowager madam had been sick in bed for years. As for the heir, Xie Linyuan, he had disappeared during a war in the Northern Territory 3 years ago. No one knew whether he was alive or dead. All he had left behind were 2 young children. One was 7, the other was 5. If one wanted to make the marriage sound respectable, then marrying into the estate meant becoming the heir's wife. If one wanted to say it plainly, it meant becoming a living widow the moment one entered the door, while raise 2 children for a man who might never return. Naturally, Shen Mingzhu refused. So Madame Shen wept and wailed as she locked the original Shen Fuguang in the woodshed, starved her for 3 days, and forced her to take her elder sister's place. The original girl had always been timid and weak. By the time she was pushed into the bridal sedan chair, she was already so ill and dizzy that she could barely think. Then I opened my eyes, and I became her. When the sedan chair finally stopped, the wedding matron called from outside, "Bride, please step down." I slowly lifted one corner of the bridal veil and looked out. In front of the Jing'an Marquis estate, the red paint on the main gates had faded and peeled. The stone lions still stood there, solemn and imposing, but the 4 characters on the plaque above the entrance had gathered a layer of dust. There was no groom waiting for me. Only a pale, middle-aged woman sitting in a cushioned chair. Behind her stood 2 children. The older boy wore a small blue robe. His eyes were sharp, fierce, and guarded, like a little wolf already showing its claws. The younger girl had her hair tied into 2 small buns. She was delicate and pretty, with wide, dark eyes. She hid behind her brother and quietly studied me. Around them stood many relatives who had clearly come to watch the show. There was no joy in their eyes, only contempt. Someone lowered their voice and said, "The Shen family is truly heartless. They refused to marry off their cherished eldest daughter, so they shoved this unfavored second girl here instead." Another person laughed softly. The Jing'an Marquis estate is in no position to be picky now. The heir's fate is unknown. It is already good enough that a woman is willing to enter the door. I heard every word clearly, but I felt no anger. After many years as a founding partner in a startup company in my previous life, I understood one principle better than most people. The more others looked down on something, the more likely it was to be an undervalued asset. The Marquis estate might be declining, but it still had a hereditary title. It still had a name. It still had property, old connections, old retainers, and a foundation that ordinary families could not even dream of having. The 2 children might be difficult, but they were the legitimate bloodline of the estate. As for the missing husband, he was indeed a problem. But from another angle, his absence meant I would not have to waste time handling a complicated marriage right away. For now, all I needed to do was rescue this company before it collapsed completely. Holding the wedding matron's hand, I stepped down from the sedan chair and placed my feet steadily on the stone ground. At that moment, everyone thought they were going to see a frightened, pitiful bride who had been bullied into silence. Instead, I simply lifted my eyes and looked calmly at the woman sitting in the cushioned chair. Daughter-in-law Shen Fuguang greets mother. The dowager madam was stunned for a moment. She probably had not expected that after being pushed here by the Shen family, I could still remain so composed. She coughed twice. Her voice was weak, but it still carried the dignity of a noble household's mistress. Come inside. The wedding hall was cold and quiet. There was no groom, so I bowed to a memorial tablet bearing the name of Xie Linyuan. Some of the relatives in the hall could not hold back their snickers, but I bowed properly. First bow, to heaven and earth. Second bow, to the elders. When it came time for husband and wife to bow to each other, I looked at that tablet and silently calculated in my heart. The husband was absent, which meant there was no internal interference. The mother-in-law was seriously ill, which meant the chairwoman was temporarily unable to manage the company. The two children were young, which meant the core future assets could still be trained. The estate's accounts were chaotic. The servants were lazy. Debts were pressing from all sides. The businesses were failing. The family reputation was crumbling. To anyone else, this sounded like a hopeless disaster. To me, it was a standard project on the verge of bankruptcy, but with a valuable foundation still intact. As long as there was time, authority, and cash flow, there was still a chance to turn everything around. After the ceremony, I was sent to the bridal chamber. The room was lit with red candles. A quilt embroidered with mandarin ducks lay spread across the bed, but a damp, musty smell seeped in from the window. I had just sat down when I heard soft, rustling footsteps outside. The next instant, a black toad was pushed through the crack under the door. Then a lump of wet mud landed beside my embroidered shoe with a soft splat. A boy's deliberately muffled laughter came from outside. I lowered my head and looked at the toad. Then I looked at the mud beside my shoe. And suddenly, I smiled. So this was my welcoming gift. I did not scream, I did not cry. I simply stood up, picked up a teacup from the table, gently covered the toad, and placed it inside an empty food box. Then I wrapped the wet mud in a handkerchief, walked to the door, and pulled it open. Outside, Xie Chang'an and Xie Nianing had no time to escape. Both children froze where they stood. Xie Chang'an lifted his chin and glared at me. "So you're the new stepmother?" I nodded. "Yes," he sneered. "Don't think that just because you married into this house, you can control us. Let me tell you, my father will never acknowledge you." I looked at his stubborn little face and almost laughed. He was only 7 years old. He was obviously scared inside, yet he insisted on pretending to be fierce. I held the food box out toward him. "Since this is the greeting gift you gave me, I cannot fail to return it properly." Xie Chang'an froze. "What do you mean?" I placed the wrapped mud beside the food box. "Tomorrow at dawn, the two of you will come to the courtyard. You will clean the mud outside the bridal chamber, and then you will send this toad back to the pond." Xie Nianing whispered, "What if we don't?" I smiled gently. "Then from tomorrow onward, the sweet cakes sent by the kitchen to the two of you will be reduced by half." Both children's faces changed at once, so even the fiercest little wolf was afraid of losing his cakes. Xie Chang'an clenched his teeth. "You wouldn't dare," I said warmly. "I have just entered this household, so of course I don't dare to touch your people, and I don't dare to punish your lessons. But I do dare to manage the kitchen, because from today onward, the kitchen accounts belong to me." Xie Chang'an had clearly not expected that I would neither cry nor shout, but instead strike at the most important point the moment I opened my mouth. His face turned red with anger. He grabbed his sister and ran away. I closed the door, pulled off the bridal veil, and casually tossed it onto the table. The red candles flickered. In the bronze mirror, I saw a strange face. She was 17 or 18 years old, with clear, delicate features, but her complexion was as pale as paper. The original Shen Fuguang had suffered too much. The Shen family treated her as a chess piece. The Marquis estate treated her as a joke. Even the two children treated her as an enemy. But from today onward, she was no longer the same Shen Fuguang. I would live in her place, and I would live well. The next morning, at dawn, I rose and went to the courtyard. As expected, Xie Chang'an and Xie Nianing did not come. I was not in a hurry. I went directly to the kitchen. Several kitchen women were gathered around the stove, drinking hot soup. When they saw me enter, they hurriedly stood and bowed, but there was not much respect on their faces. I swept my gaze across the stove. Breakfast had already been prepared. For the dowager madam, there was bird's nest porridge. For the two children, there was sheep's milk custard and steamed sugar cakes. For me, there was only a bowl of cold white porridge. The kitchen manager, Nanny Liu, smiled and said, "Madam has just arrived, and this old servant does not yet know your taste, so I prepared something plain for now." I smiled as well. Plain is very good. A trace of satisfaction flashed through Nanny Liu's eyes. The next moment, I picked up the bowl of porridge and poured it directly into the slop bucket. From today onward, every purchase list, every entry and exit record from the storeroom, and every account for rice, flour, meat, and vegetables will be sent to my room daily at the hour of Chen. If it is late by even a moment, half a month's wages will be deducted. Nanny Liu's expression changed. "Madam, the kitchen of the Marquis estate has always been managed by the dowager madam's people." I looked at her. Mother is seriously ill. Yesterday, she personally said that after entering the household, I should begin learning how to manage the family. If you do not believe me, you may come with me and ask her yourself. Nanny Liu choked on her words. I continued. "Also, the young master and young miss will have their sweet cakes reduced by half today." As soon as the words fell, a sharp cry came from the door. "On what right?" Xie Chang'an rushed in. Xie Nianing followed behind him, her eyes already red. I glanced at him. "On the right that you gave me a greeting gift last night, but did not take responsibility for cleaning it up this morning." Xie Chang'an said angrily, "I am the young master of the Marquis estate." I nodded. "Exactly. That means you should understand rules even more. If you were an ordinary child, a single punishment would be enough after a mistake. But you are the young master of the Marquis estate. In the future, you will have to support the family. If you cannot even clean what you dirtied yourself, how will you support an entire household?" Xie Chang'an was blocked by my words. Xie Nianing whispered, "Brother isn't unable to clean it. He just thinks it's embarrassing." I crouched down and looked at her. "Then tell me, which is more embarrassing? Doing something wrong and refusing to correct it, or cleaning up the mess you made?" Xie Nianing thought about it, then whispered, "Doing something wrong and refusing to correct it is more embarrassing." Xie Chang'an glared at her. She immediately shrank back. I stood. "You have the time of one incense stick. Clean it properly, and the sweet cakes will remain as usual. If you refuse, they will be reduced by half for 3 days." Xie Chang'an stared at me with all his might. In the end, he still took his sister and went to the bridal chamber door. Nanny Liu stood nearby, her expression ugly. I knew this was only the beginning. The real trouble in the Marquis estate was not the two children. It was the swarm of people feeding off the old ship while it slowly sank. That morning, I went to greet the dowager madam. She was leaning against a couch, her face even paler than yesterday. Nanny Qin stood beside her, gently massaging her legs. When she saw me, her eyes carried a measure of scrutiny. After bowing, I went straight to the point. "Mother, I want to see the estate's account books." The dowager madam coughed for a long while before lifting her eyes to me. "You have only just entered the household," I replied. "Precisely because I have only just entered, I must understand the family's foundation. If the estate is wealthy, then I shall learn the rules. If the estate is in crisis, then I shall learn how to put out the fire." The dowager madam fell silent. She looked at me for a long time, then suddenly gave a faint laugh. "The Shen family sent us someone who understands." I lowered my eyes and said nothing. The dowager madam asked Nanny Chin to bring out a key. "The account books are in the small storeroom in the eastern wing. If you can understand them, then read them." I accepted the key and thanked her. Nanny Chin took me to the eastern wing. The moment the small storeroom was opened, the stale smell of old paper and ink rushed out. The account books were piled into 3 large boxes. I flipped through a few pages and quickly had a general idea. The estate owned 3 shops, 2 farms, 1 tea mountain, and a stretch of mulberry fields outside the city. It sounded like quite a lot. In reality, every piece was bleeding money. The silk shop's manager was using the store to hide private transactions. The medicine shop extended credit year after year without collecting payment. The tea shop had a good location, but its methods were old and lifeless. The 2 farms reported disasters every year. As for the mulberry fields, they were half rented and half occupied by a side branch of the clan. Meanwhile, the monthly expenses of the estate were terrifying. Relatives came regularly to ask for money. Servants claimed wages for non-existent workers. Purchasing costs were inflated. Medicine costs were doubled. Even during festivals, the family still spent heavily to maintain the appearance of an aristocratic household. This was not a Marquis estate. This was a rotten mess full of financial leaks. I sat in that storeroom for the whole day, roughly going through 3 years of accounts and making a list of problems. When Nanny Chin brought tea in, she saw that I had filled more than 10 sheets of paper with writing. Her eyes changed. "Madam understood them." I rubbed my aching wrist. "Half of them." Nanny Chin could not help asking, "And the other half?" For the other half, the shop managers and farm stewards must be called here. I need to watch them lie to my face. Nanny Chin froze for a moment. Then she lowered her head and smiled. That evening, Xie Cheng'an and Xie Nianing were brought over by their nursemaid. The 2 children still looked reluctant, but they had both changed into clean clothes. Xie Nianing secretly glanced at my table. When she saw that there were no sweet cakes on it, her eyes dimmed at once. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I asked someone to bring 2 account books. Xi Cheng'an frowned. "What are you trying to do now?" I pushed an abacus toward him. The young master of the Marquis estate cannot merely memorize books. He must also know how to read accounts. Xie Cheng'an scoffed. "I'm not learning such merchant things." I glanced at him. "The rice you eat, the clothes you wear, the paper and ink you use for your studies, the tuition paid to your tutors. Tell me, which of these does not come from accounts? If you cannot understand any of this, then one day someone may sell the entire estate, and you will still help them count the money." Xi Cheng'an's small face turned pale. I opened the account book. "Today we will learn the first thing. What is income and what is expense?" Xi Nianing leaned closer. "Expense means money that has been spent, right?" I smiled. Her eyes lit up. Xi Cheng'an turned his face away, still pretending not to care, but his ears had already perked up. For half an hour, I used sweet cakes as an example. A plate of sweet cakes had 10 pieces. The kitchen said the sugar cost 10 coins, but the account book recorded 30. Where did the extra 20 coins go? Xie Nianing immediately said, Someone stole it. Xie Chang'an frowned. Perhaps sugar became more expensive. I nodded. Exactly. That is why we cannot only read the account book. We must also ask the market price, compare receipts, and check the storeroom. Xie Chang'an was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Has a lot of money been stolen from our estate?" I closed the account book and looked at him. Very likely. Xi Nianing whispered, "Then have our sweet cakes been stolen too?" I could not help laughing. Yes. That night, for the first time, the two children did not make trouble. Before leaving, Xie Nianing hesitated for a long time. Then she took out a small piece of candy hidden in her sleeve and handed it to me. "This is what I saved today." "You worked hard reading accounts. You can have it." Xi Chang'an immediately said, "Who allowed you to give that to her?" Xi Nianing pulled her hand back. I accepted the candy and said seriously, "Thank you, Nianing." The little girl blushed. Then she grabbed her brother and ran away. I watched their backs and thought to myself that these two little shareholders could still be saved. 3 days later, in the name of the heir's wife, I summoned the managers of the 3 shops. Alliger Zhou of the silk shop arrived first. He dressed more richly than I did. When he entered, he gave only a shallow bow. "Madam is young, so perhaps you do not understand business. The silk shop has been losing money in recent years because the market has been poor. There was nothing we could do." I placed an account book on the table. "If the market has been poor, why did your family buy a 2-courtyard house last month?" Manager Zhou's face stiffened. I flipped to another page. Last year, 30 bolts of Jiangnan brocade entered storage. 27 bolts were sold. The remaining 3 were recorded as damaged by mildew. But yesterday, I sent someone to inspect the shop. There were no signs of mildew in the warehouse. Instead, I saw 3 bolts of brocade with the same pattern at the Lin family's residence in the Western District. Sweat appeared on Manager Zhou's forehead. "Madam, perhaps that was done by a shop assistant." I interrupted him. "I do not listen to perhaps. I only look at evidence." He dropped to his knees. I did not immediately punish him. Instead, I ordered the other 2 managers to be invited in as well, Dowager Qian of the medicine shop, and Manager Luo of the tea shop had originally come to watch the spectacle. When they saw Manager Zhou kneeling on the ground, their expressions changed. I placed 3 account books side by side on the table. My tone was calm. "In the past, the estate was lenient, so you took the master's household for fools. Today, I will give you 2 paths. First, make up the missing money, sign new contracts, and report accounts monthly from now on. Second, be sent to the authorities, where you will return every coin with interest." The 3 men looked at one another. Alliger Zhou gritted his teeth. "Madam, why must you be so ruthless? We have kept these shops running for years. If we leave, who will earn money for the estate?" I smiled. "If you were truly earning money, the estate would not be an empty shell today." Manager Zhou's face flushed. I tapped the table. "Within 3 days, repay the accounts, hand over authority, and sign new contracts. If you are unwilling, then we will meet at the government office." After they left, Nanny Chin said worriedly, "Madam, these managers all have connections behind them. I'm afraid they will not submit easily." I said, "If they don't submit, that's even better. We need someone to make an example of." Sure enough, that very night, something happened at the silk shop. Someone smashed the shop doors under cover of darkness and splashed filthy water across the walls. They even spread rumors that the Marquis estate was mistreating old servants. The news came the next morning, and the servants in the estate began to feel unsettled. When the Dowager Madam heard of it, she coughed severely and sent Nanny Chin to ask whether I wanted to slow down for now. I only said, "Please ask Mother to rest easy. I know what I'm doing." Then I took Xie Chang'an to the silk shop. His face was stiff the entire way. Clearly, he felt ashamed. When we arrived at the shop, the crowd of onlookers had not yet dispersed. Manager Joe hid behind the people, his eyes full of satisfaction. I did not order the guards to drive the crowd away. Instead, I asked the shop assistants to bring out a long table. Then I placed the account books and several bolts of cloth on it. I raised my voice. Neighbors and friends, today the Marquis Estate's silk shop will not open its doors to sell cloth. Today, we open the doors to settle accounts. The crowd instantly quieted. I pointed at the brocade. Last year, this brocade was purchased at 120 taels per bolt. The account book states that 3 bolts were damaged by mildew and written off. Yet the exact same pattern has now been made into new clothing in the Lin household. If mildewed cloth can run into someone else's home by itself, then that truly is a rare wonder. Someone in the crowd burst out laughing. Alligator Joe's face changed drastically. He tried to slip away, but the estate guards stopped him. I took out another purchase receipt. Manager Joe said the silk business is poor and the shop loses money every year, but on the same street, Splendid Pavilion earned 3,000 taels last year. The Marquis Estate's shop has a better location and lower supply costs, yet it lost 800 taels. Everyone, tell me, was the market poor or were the manager's hands too long? The common people loved watching excitement. Immediately, murmurs spread through the crowd. Alligator Joe panicked. "Madam is slandering me." I looked at Xie Chang'an. "Chang'an, calculate what you learned yesterday for everyone." Xie Chang'an froze. He had not expected me to ask him to speak in public. I lowered my voice. "You are the young master of the Marquis Estate. Today, you are not losing face. You are establishing authority for your family." Xie Chang'an pressed his lips together and picked up the abacus. At first, his fingers trembled, but after a few movements, his voice gradually steadied. 1 bolt of brocade cost 120 taels. 3 bolts written off means 360 taels. Last year, the shop falsely reported 140 taels in transportation costs and 220 taels in dye costs. These 3 items alone make up 720 taels of missing money. The crowd erupted. The more Xie Chang'an spoke, the smoother he became. His eyes shone brightly. Manager Joe's legs gave out, and he finally knelt. "Madam, spare me. This small one is willing to repay." I looked at him. Too late. That day, Manager Joe was sent to the authorities, and the silk shop's accounts were sealed and checked again. When Xie Chang'an returned to the estate, his back was very straight. On the way, he suddenly asked, "Did you already know yesterday that he would cause trouble?" I said, "A greedy person will always struggle when his tail is caught." He asked again, "Then why did you bring me?" I looked ahead. "The estate does not belong to me alone. You must see with your own eyes how others have been bullying your family." He was silent for a long while, then he said quietly, "I didn't know before." I said, "It's not too late to know now." After that day, the way Xie Chang'an looked at me changed. He still refused to call me mother, but he no longer deliberately caused trouble. Xi Nianing was much more direct. Every day, she hugged an account book and came to find me, saying she wanted to learn how to catch thieves who stole sweet cakes. After the first knife fell, the rest of the estate became much more obedient. Manager Qian of the medicine shop was the first to make up the missing money. Manager Luo of the tea shop also handed over his account books. I did not blindly drive everyone out. Those who could still be used signed new contracts and received profit-based bonuses. Those who could not be used had their thefts checked clearly and were expelled from the businesses. After that, I began to reorganize the estate's properties. The silk shop was renamed Fuguang Embroidery House. It no longer sold only old-fashioned fabric. Instead, I hired embroiderers to design ready-made clothing styles and released new patterns according to the seasons. The medicine shop was divided into two parts. The front hall sold medicine, while the back hall offered consultations. I hired an elderly physician with a clean reputation at a fair price, and on the 1st and 15th of every month, he offered free consultations for poor people. The tea shop became a tea and snack house. Private rooms were set upstairs, while affordable tea drinks were sold downstairs. Its main customers were scholars, travelers, and merchants. These methods were not new in my previous life, but in this era, they were enough to make people's eyes light up. 1 month later, the first batch of spring dresses from Fuguang Embroidery House sold out completely. 2 months later, the tea and snack house was full every day. 3 months later, because of its free consultations, the medicine shop gained a good reputation, and even noble households began sending people to buy herbs there. At last, the Marquis estate had stable income again. The servants' monthly wages were paid on time. The kitchen no longer dared to cut corners on purchases. The Dowager Madam's medicine was finally made from real ingredients. The Dowager Madam's condition gradually stabilized. The way she looked at me became more and more complicated. One day, she called me to her side and handed me an old wooden box. I opened it and saw the seal used to manage the household's internal affairs. "Mother, this is—" The Dowager Madam leaned against her pillow. Her voice was soft. "I thought you would not last 3 months in this household." I smiled. "Mother underestimated me." She smiled too. "Indeed, I did." After a pause, she said, "If Lin Yuan is still alive, seeing you like this would probably put his heart at ease." I closed the wooden box and did not answer. The name Xie Lin Yuan was like an old wound to everyone in the estate. He was the Dowager Madam's eldest son. He was the father of the 2 children. He was the final hope of the Jing'an Marquis estate. But to me, he was only a name written on the marriage document. I had never met him, so naturally, I could not speak of deep affection. I only knew that if he came back alive, the estate would have a true master again. The authority I had held in my hands over these months might be taken back. That was not necessarily a bad thing, but it would certainly be troublesome. I was not afraid of trouble. I simply disliked anything I could not control. Unfortunately, some people loved sending trouble my way just when I had finally stabilized everything. That winter, news came from the Northern Territory. Xie Linyuan, the heir of the Jing'an Marquis estate, who had been missing for 3 years, had returned alive. When the news reached the estate, I was teaching Xie Nianing how to write. The little girl's hand shook, and ink spread across the whole sheet of paper. Xie Chang'an jumped to his feet, his face full of shock and joy. "Father is back!" The Dowager Madam burst into tears when she heard the news. The entire estate rejoiced. Only I sat in front of the desk, looking at the blot of ink on the paper, and sighed softly in my heart. All right, the new boss had returned. Checkpoint. 3,000 words, 20 min at 150 WPM. On the day Xie Linyuan returned to the capital, the entire long street was crowded with people. A young general of old, missing for 3 years yet not dead, now returning with his remaining soldiers after fighting his way out of a northern encirclement. Such a story was enough to set the whole capital boiling. I accompanied the 2 children and the Dowager Madam to welcome him at the city gate. From a distance, I saw a group of riders entering the city, covered in dust from the road. The man at the front wore old black armor. His shoulders were straight, his figure tall, and his face cold and sharp. His eyes seemed carved from a blade. He did not have the arrogance of a rising noble, What he carried was the heavy pressure of a man who had walked through life and death and returned. Xie Cheng'an and Xie Nianing ran toward him at the same time. "Father!" Xie Linyuan dismounted, dropped to one knee, and pulled both children tightly into his arms. His arms trembled slightly. I stood not far away and watched the scene. I did not feel sour or jealous. Instead, I felt a quiet relief. The children had finally waited until their father came home. The dowager madam was also helped forward. The reunion between mother and son naturally brought more tears. Only at the very end did Xie Linyuan's gaze fall on me. Nanny Qin reminded him softly. "Herr, this is the heir's wife, Shen Fuguang." Xie Linyuan looked at me. A flash of unfamiliarity and scrutiny passed through his eyes. I bowed to him. "Husband, may you be well." He was silent for a moment before returning the courtesy. "These 3 years, Madam has worked hard." His tone was polite, like he was speaking to an outsider. I did not mind. That night, the Marquis estate held a family banquet. Xie Linyuan sat in the main seat. The dowager madam sat beside him. The 2 children pressed close to him, as if afraid he might vanish again. I sat on the other side and quietly served food. Several elders from the clan had also come. Third great-uncle raised a cup of wine and smiled meaningfully. Now that Linyuan has returned, the estate finally has a backbone again. These past years, it must have been difficult for a young woman to manage the household. Now the household authority should be returned to the heir. Men should be the ones to make decisions in the family. The table instantly fell silent. Xie Cheng'an frowned and looked as if he wanted to speak, but I stopped him with a glance. Xie Linyuan looked at me. I set down my chopsticks and said calmly, "Third great-uncle is right. Since husband has returned, naturally the major affairs of the estate should be decided by husband." Third great-uncle nodded in satisfaction. Then I continued. "However, handing over the household authority is not something that can be done with a single sentence. The estate currently has 3 shops, 2 farms, 1 tea mountain, 87 account books, 24 debt contracts, and 136 newly signed employment agreements. If husband wishes to take over, I will prepare a detailed list tomorrow and hand everything over item by item." The smile on third great-uncle's face froze. I continued. "In addition, Fuguang Embroidery House must deliver winter garments ordered by noble clients next month. The tea and snack house has just reached a supply agreement with a Jiangnan tea merchant. The medicine shop's free consultation roster must be renewed. The mulberry fields outside the city have been changed to medicinal mulberry this year, and the rent reduction contracts with tenant farmers must also be signed again. These matters all require husband to review them personally." Xie Linyuan's eyes shifted slightly. Third great-uncle looked as if his head hurt from listening. He coughed. "These small matters do not all need to trouble Linyuan." I smiled. "But third great-uncle just said that men should make the decisions. I assume you did not mean they should only enjoy the benefits without doing the work." Xie Cheng'an lowered his head, holding back laughter. Xi Nianing was even more direct. She placed a piece of sweet cake in my bowl. Xie Linyuan looked at me and suddenly said, "The household authority will remain with Madam. I have only just returned to the capital, and military affairs have not yet been settled. For the matters of the estate, I must trouble Madam to continue managing them." Third great-uncle's expression turned ugly, but he could not say anything more. I lowered my eyes. "Since that is the case, I will temporarily act in this role for a few more days." Xie Linyuan said, "Not temporarily. I am entrusting it to you." I lifted my eyes and looked at him. His gaze was steady. There was no probing and no perfunctory politeness. In my heart, my first impression of this missing husband rose slightly. At least he was not stupid. However, his return was not entirely good. Ji Linyuan had achieved merit in the Northern Territory. The emperor summoned him to the palace several times and granted him a position in the Ministry of War. The Marquis estate quickly became lively again. Relatives who had avoided us in the past now came one after another. Matchmakers also appeared. They said that, although the heir's wife had already entered the household, the marriage had been rushed back then, and the heir had not even been present. Since the marriage had never truly been completed, now that the heir had returned, it would only be natural if he wished to take noble concubines and continue the family line. When these words reached my ears, I was checking accounts at the tea and snack house. The manager asked carefully, "Madam, should this small one drive away those people gossiping outside?" I continued flipping through the account book. No need. But their words are unpleasant. I smiled. Mouths grow on other people. Money grows in our accounts. Which is more important? The manager immediately said, "Money is more important." I nodded and kept calculating. I did not care, but that did not mean no one else cared. When I returned to the estate that evening, Xie Nianing threw herself into my arms, her eyes red from crying. "Mother," they said, "Father is going to marry someone else. They said you are not my real mother, and you will be driven away." That was the first time she called me mother. My heart softened. I stroked her hair. "Who said that?" She sobbed and refused to answer. Shi Chang'an stood at the door, his face dark. Third aunt said it. She also said a stepmother will always be an outsider. Now that father is back, you should know your place and step aside. Before I could speak, Xie Linyuan's voice came from outside. "Step aside from what?" Both children stiffened. Xie Linyuan walked in, still carrying the cold air from the palace. Xie Nianing immediately rushed to him. "Father, don't drive mother away." Xie Linyuan lowered his head to look at her, then looked at me. I said lightly. The children heard a few idle remarks. "Husband need not take it to heart." He frowned. "Who said them?" Xie Chang'an gritted his teeth. "Third aunt." Xie Linyuan was silent for a moment. Then he turned to his attendant. "Prepare gifts tomorrow and send the third branch back to the ancestral residence to rest. They do not need to remain as guests in the capital estate." The attendant answered at once. I was somewhat surprised. Xie Linyuan looked at me. "Madam may take such idle remarks to heart." I smiled. "Why take them to heart? They delay making money." He seemed startled for a moment. Then he gave a low laugh. It was the first time I had seen him smile. His cold, stern features seemed brushed by spring wind, and there was an unexpected warmth in them. But Xie Nianing cared nothing for this. She hugged me tightly and said seriously, "Mother makes money. Nianing will protect mother." Xie Chang'an said awkwardly, "I can too." Xie Linyuan looked at the two children. There was guilt in his eyes, but also comfort. After that night, everyone in the estate knew that although the heir had returned, he had not taken back Madam's authority, nor did he have any intention of marrying another woman. Those who had been peering in from every corner finally quieted for a few days. But the real storm soon arrived. The Shen family came to visit. After I had married in as a substitute bride, the Shen family had acted as if they had forgotten this daughter existed. When the Marquis estate was declining, they feared being implicated and never once sent anyone to ask after me. Now that Xie Linyuan had returned with merit and the estate's businesses were thriving, Madame Shen brought Shen Mingzu to our door. Shen Mingzu wore a peach-red brocade dress and so many jeweled hairpins that her head seemed heavy. She was still the same high and mighty person from the original owner's memories. As soon as she entered, her eyes reddened. "Younger sister, I have been thinking of you all this time. It was only because mother was unwell that I couldn't come to see you." I looked at her and did not respond. Madame Shen wiped her tears. "Fuguang, what happened back then was the Shen family's fault. But now your hardship has ended. Herr Linyuan has returned, and the Marquis estate has risen again. You cannot forget your maternal family." I lifted my teacup. What does mother want me to do so that I do not forget? Seeing that I seemed willing to listen, Madame Shen immediately said, "Your father lacks a connection in the Ministry of Revenue. Mingju's is also of marriageable age. If the Marquis estate is willing to speak on her behalf and arrange a good marriage, the Shen family can support you in return." I almost laughed. When they pushed me into the fire pit, they had not thought of supporting me. Now that I had dug the fire pit into a gold mine, they wanted to share the profits. Shen Mingju said softly, "Younger sister, I heard the tea and snack house does excellent business. I also want to learn something about management. Why not let me help you at the shop so I can share your burdens?" I set down my teacup and looked at her. Elder sister wants to help me, or elder sister wants to use my shop to practice? Shen Mingju's face paled. How could younger sister think of me that way? Madame Shen snapped, "Fuguang, now that your wings have grown strong, you no longer recognize your own family?" I said lightly. "Mother is mistaken. It is not that my wings have grown strong. It is that I have finished calculating the accounts." She froze. I continued, "Back then, the Shen family accepted the Marquis estate's betrothal gifts, then changed the bride at the last moment. If the Marquis estate pursued this matter, it would be marriage fraud. Mother, are you certain you wish to talk to me about family affection?" Madame Shen's expression changed instantly. Shen Mingju bit her lip. "Younger sister, the matter has already passed. Why must you be so harsh?" I looked at her. "If elder sister believes it has passed, then you should not have come today." Just then, Xie Linyuan entered from outside. When Shen Mingju saw him, her eyes brightened at once. I pretended not to notice. Xie Linyuan gave Madame Shen the courtesy of a junior. His tone was distant. "Madame Shen, what brings you here today?" Madame Shen immediately put on a smile. "Here, we are all one family." Xie Linyuan said, "Madame Shen, please choose your words carefully. The Marquis estate's madam is Shen Fuguang. The Shen family and the Marquis estate are related by marriage, but you are not members of the same household." Madame Shen's smile could no longer hold. Xie Linyuan continued, "As for the substitute marriage back then, my wife does not mention it because she is generous. The Marquis estate did not pursue it because my mother valued old ties. That does not mean the Shen family did nothing wrong." Shen Mingju's eyes filled with tears. "Here, you misunderstand. Back then, I also had no choice." Xie Linyuan's expression did not change. "I only know that the one who entered the bridal sedan chair was Fuguang. The one who held up the Marquis estate was also Fuguang. As for what difficulties others may have had, they have nothing to do with me." I lifted my eyes and looked at him. Those words were rather pleasant to hear. In the end, the Shen mother and daughter left in humiliation. After sending them away, I said to Xie Linyuan, "Thank you, husband." He looked at me. "There is no need to thank me. I only spoke the truth." I smiled. Husband has become very good at speaking lately. He was quiet for a moment, then said seriously, "I only returned too late." The words landed softly. For some reason, something in my heart shifted. I had always treated the Marquis estate as a startup company. I had treated the children as future assets to cultivate. I had treated Xie Linyuan as an unpredictable variable. But at that moment, I suddenly realized that he was not a variable. He was also a person in this broken family who had fought desperately to come home alive. After Xie Linyuan returned, the Marquis estate truly began to rise. He established himself in court, while I expanded business in the capital. The ready-made garments of Fuguang Embroidery House were noticed by noblewomen in the palace. The tea and snack house became a favorite gathering place for scholars. The medicine shop's free consultations gained increasing fame. Even the Empress's palace sent people to purchase herbs. Using the Marquis estate's old retainers, I also opened an escort agency. The agency did not only protect goods, it also provided travel permit guidance, route consultation, lodging connections, horse supply arrangements, and compensation for damaged goods. At the time, this was extremely new. Many merchants did not believe in it at first, but after the first batch of cargo traveled safely along the southern route and arrived in the capital without loss, the escort agency's reputation soared. After reading my contracts, Xie Linjuan was silent for a long time. I asked, "Does husband find something inappropriate?" He said, "No, I was only thinking that the way you do business is like fighting a war without smoke." I smiled. The market is a battlefield. Husband uses blades and spears in the north. I use an abacus in the capital. At their root, they are the same. He looked at me, his gaze deep. "Fuguang, if you had been born a man, you could have been granted a marquis title or become a minister." I shook my head. If I had been born a man, I might not have walked this path. He did not understand. I said, "Women are trapped in the inner courtyard, so the first things I saw were the kitchen, the account books, the children, the sickbed, the embroiderers, the widows, and the medicine money of poor women. These cracks that men cannot see are exactly the roads I can walk." Xie Linyuan said nothing for a long while. Later, he personally petitioned for permission so that the Marquis estate's medicine shop could qualify as an imperial supplier. He also arranged for the families of wounded soldiers from the Northern Army to work in my embroidery house and medicinal fields. I taught those women to read accounts, recognize characters, work, and share profits. At first, many people in the capital laughed at me for being soft-hearted. Later, they stopped laughing, because those soldiers' wives, mothers, sisters, and widows were skilled with their hands and willing to work hard. The embroidery house doubled its production. The medicinal fields became stable. The escort agency gained a strong reputation in the army because it cared for military families. The Marquis estate earned more and more money, and its reputation grew better and better. Xi Nianing followed me in and out of shops. She learned how to read accounts, and she learned how to speak with people. Xie Cheng'an followed Xie Linyuan to practice martial arts and study military books. But at night, he still came to me to learn accounting. Once, after he finished calculating a profit distribution for the escort agency, he suddenly said awkwardly, "Mother." The brush in my hand stopped. Xie Cheng'an's ears turned red, but he forced himself to speak. "Nining already calls you that. If I don't, it makes me look petty." I lowered my head and continued writing, but the corners of my mouth lifted despite myself. I heard you." He became anxious. "That's all?" I looked up and smiled. "What else should there be?" He snorted and ran away. Outside the door came Xi Nianing's clear laughter. Day by day, the Marquis estate changed. From cold and decaying, it became bright and prosperous. But when there is more money, there are more jealous eyes. The Wan family, the largest silk merchant family in the capital, began targeting Fuguang Embroidery House. First, they offered high prices to poach embroiderers. Then they suppressed our fabric supply. After that, they spread rumors, saying that Fuguang Embroidery House used military families as workers, that those women carried bad fortune, and that noble women who wore their clothes would be tainted by inauspicious energy. The words were vicious. They were not only aimed at my business, they were aimed at those women who had finally managed to stand up and live. The embroidery house became uneasy. A young widow knelt before me and cried, "Madam, are we causing trouble for you?" I helped her up and looked at the silent women in the room. "You are not trouble. You are the roots of Fuguang Embroidery House." They stared at me blankly. I continued, "Others call you unlucky because they are afraid you will stand up. They are afraid you will earn money. They are afraid you will no longer lower your heads. Since they are afraid, we must stand even more firmly." 3 days later, Fuguang Embroidery House released a new clothing line. It was named Return to Peace. On the cuff of every garment was a very fine embroidered peace pattern. I did not deliberately sell sadness. I only placed a sign in front of the shop, clearly stating that these garments were made by the families of fallen soldiers from the Northern Territory. For every garment sold, 10% of the silver would be placed into the Return to Peace Fund to support war orphans and provide for the elderly mothers of wounded soldiers. At first, the people of the capital only watched. Then Xie Linyuan wore an outer robe with the Return to Peace pattern into the palace. The next day, several elderly generals' wives personally came to the embroidery house to buy garments. On the third day, the empress bestowed a plaque. The Wan family's rumors became a complete joke. Return to Peace garments sold out overnight. The Wan family was unwilling to accept defeat. They secretly hired local troublemakers to cause a disturbance at the embroidery house. This time, before I could make a move, Shi Chang'an arrived with the estate guards. The young boy stood in front of the shop door and said coldly, "Who dares touch my mother's shop?" Shi Nianings stood beside him with her hands on her waist. "And my embroidery sisters." When I arrived, I saw the two children standing side by side, guarding the entrance. At that moment, my heart softened completely. The mischievous little ghosts who had once thrown a toad into my bridal chamber had now truly become children who would protect me with everything they had. In the end, the Wan family lost. They had underestimated the Marquis' estate. They had also underestimated a woman who had crawled out of the mud. Half a year later, I bought 2 of the Wan family's best shops and turned Fuguang Embroidery House into the foremost ready-made clothing business in the capital. The tea and snack house expanded to 3 branches. The medicine shop established a purchasing station in Jiangnan. The escort agency opened a full north-south merchant route. The Marquis estate no longer relied only on its title to survive. It stood firmly on real industries. At the end of the year, the emperor held a banquet to reward meritorious officials. Because of his military achievements in the north, Xie Linyuan was granted the rank of first-class general. As for me, because I had settled military families, aided the weak, and managed business with success, the empress publicly praised me as the foremost mistress of the capital. When those 4 words spread beyond the palace gates, the entire capital was shaken. Some admired me, some envied me, some said I simply had a good fate, that I had married into the Marquis estate and waited until my husband came home. When I heard this, I only found it amusing. A good fate? When I first arrived, all I had was a substitute bride's sedan chair, a decaying Marquis estate, 2 children who hated me, a severely ill mother-in-law, a missing husband, 3 boxes of rotten accounts, and a house full of people trying to drain the family dry. If that was called a good fate, then perhaps I truly did have one, because I had never waited for someone else to give me a path. I built my own. After the palace banquet ended, Xie Linyuan walked with me through the palace gates. Snow fell upon the red walls and golden tiles, covering the world in quiet cold. He adjusted my cloak around my shoulders and suddenly said, "Fuguang, you were wronged." I smiled. "Why are you suddenly saying this today?" he said. "On our wedding day, I was not there. You bowed alone. You entered the household alone. You supported the estate alone. I owe you a true wedding." My steps paused. He looked at me, his eyes serious. "If you are willing, let us bow once more. This time I will personally hold your hand and lead you through the door." The wind and snow were silent. I thought of the day I had first transmigrated, sitting inside the bridal sedan chair. At that time, all I had calculated were authority, account books, cash flow, and the survival of the household. Back then, I only wanted to live, stand firmly, earn money, raise the children, and protect the estate as an asset. But people are not account books. After enough time passes, a cold stove becomes warm. A broken house becomes bright. Strangers become family. I looked at Xie Linyuan and said softly, "All right." The following spring, the Marquis estate was once again hung with red silk. This time, there was no cold wedding hall. There was no tablet standing in for the groom. There were no mocking voices. The dowager madam sat in the hall, smiling with tears in her eyes. Shi Chang'an wore new clothes and stood solemnly like a little adult. Xie Nianing held a basket of flowers, smiling so brightly that her eyes curved like crescents. All the embroiderers, managers, guards, military families, and old retainers came to offer congratulations. Xie Linyuan held my hand and led me through the courtyard filled with spring light. He lowered his voice and said, "Madam, this time you cannot treat the Marquis estate as only a startup company." I could not help laughing. "That depends on husband's performance," he said. "Then for the rest of my life, I will help Madam check the accounts." My smile deepened. "That is not necessary. I can check accounts myself," he asked. "Then what can I do?" I looked toward the lights ahead and said softly, "Walk this road with me." He tightened his grip on my hand. "All right." Later, everyone in the capital knew of the Jing'an Marquis estate. They said Xie Linyuan was the war god who returned from the northern territory. They said Shen Fuguang was the foremost mistress who could turn stone into gold. They also said that the two children of the Marquis estate protected their mother more fiercely than anyone. If someone dared to speak badly of Shen Fuguang, young General Shi could turn hostile on the spot, while Miss Shi could investigate that person's account books until not even the bottom line remained hidden. Still later, Fuguang Trading House spread across the north and south. The Return to Peace Fund raised countless orphans. The military family workshops expanded from the capital to the border provinces. I became someone admired by women merchants throughout the land, but what I loved most was still returning home at dusk every day. I loved seeing the dowager madam sitting beneath the corridor, warming herself in the sun. I loved seeing Xie Chang'an practicing swordsmanship in the training yard. I loved seeing Xie Nianing chasing after a shop manager with an account book in her arms, asking where a suspicious expense had gone, and I loved seeing Xie Linyuan standing at the gate, waiting for me. He would take my cloak and ask, "How much did you earn today?" I would hand him the account book and say, "Husband can see for himself." He always accepted it with a smile. But he could never calculate faster than I could. Many years later, someone asked me what I was most proud of in this life. Was it becoming the foremost mistress after entering as an unwanted substitute bride? Was it turning a decaying Marquis estate into a wealthy household known across the land? Was it raising two children who protected me with all their hearts? Or was it waiting until the husband who had been missing for 3 years returned home? I thought for a long time. In the end, I said none of those. What I was proudest of was this. When I first arrived in this world, everyone believed I could only accept my fate. But I did not. I took the terrible hand that fate dealt me, sorted every card one by one, and played them one by one. And in the end, I won the whole game.